Another day has dawned here in the shop, and on this fiddle I am going to now take a scraper and work this contours down. I've noticed there's kind of a finish on this neck, and typically violin necks don't have finish on them. I imagine this neck is probably a replacement neck, though it may not be. It may be original. But typically they don't have finish on them. A lot of the finish is missing anyway, and it's blotchy, so I'm just going to scrape it all down, oil it up, make it look real nice. So here we go.
I'm an old dirt farmer. I scrape a living from the soul, like my father before me. I labor and toil, but my father said, son, you should move away. He said, farm life is dying, son, please don't stay. I moved to the city and I tried to fit in.
Got a little 220 here, and I'm working this neck down with the 220. You can see I kind of made a line around here for the finish, and then when you run over it with the 220 like this, you can kind of blend that line a little bit. You know, a lot of that finish is flaked off up in here anyway, and I may end up taking it all off, especially on this heel, and then redoing it, but I'm going to leave it for now and maybe touch it up and see what it looks like. You just, no point doing any more than you have to do. I don't think you can feel at this point where the neck is and where the fingerboard is. I mean, like, you can't feel that seam at all. There's no transition that you can feel.
I thought of my father, how the crops would get in.
The height now is exactly what I want, which is 7/8 of an inch. It's ready to be glued in there, so I'll get started on that. As I was inspecting this, getting ready to glue the neck in there, I'm noticing that the sides are loose in a place or two. I've got some pretty small wedges here. I'm going to stick that in there a little bit to open it up just a little bit and hopefully get glue squeezed down in there. Anything you can get glue into is a good idea. And of course, anytime you go on camera with a glue bottle, they're always clogged. Off camera, I already separated this side and got glue in there. So now I'm doing this side here, kind of using the force of the bottle to squeeze it down in there some, and using whatever I can to poke the glue down in there. Actually, I think that's it. Let me see if there's any more anywhere else. We'll go ahead and get the glue in this whole area now, and we'll paint it all around really well. More glue than you need for sure. I'll even coat this a little bit just so it has the very best chance of sticking. It fits it pretty well, so I don't think I'll have to do too much in terms of checking here other than just the height. Double checking this so it makes sure it didn't move. If anything, it's just a teeny tiny bit higher, which I'm okay with that. It's about 15/16 to 7/8 in that range there. It's kind of in between them. Okay, the trick of this is how to clamp it. Ordinarily, there's a tab under here, and that tab is missing right now. I mean, I've got the tab, but it's kind of in bad shape. Ordinarily, the tab is attached to the back still, so you can just clamp between here, and that gives you a pretty good clamping. Right now, that's not my best option, I don't think. So I'm going to go get my rubber band and go all the way around this thing and wrap it up that way, and we'll see how that goes. Some people would probably say, why didn't you take the chin rest off? Well, I'm not working on that end, for one thing. Second thing is, Time is money. Everything takes time. If I don't have to take time to take the chin rest off and put it back on, you don't have to pay for it. Just that simple. If I thought it was going to hinder me doing the repair, I would take it off. I am pretty sure this is going to hold this. It puts a lot more pressure on it than you might think with all this rubber wrapped around there. Now the trick is, how do I stop wrapping and start locking? Okay, that seems to be working pretty well. Now, of course, I've got my height to check again, and it's kind of between the 7/8 and the 15/16, and I'm okay with that. I don't think I could really clamp it much better than that. I think that's about as good as it gets on something like this. It's very straight. Another thing, whenever you're clamping a neck on a violin, you want to make sure that this is coming down through the center, and it looks perfectly fine to me. After doing that, believe it or not, I see a tiny little crack in that center line that's separated here. Didn't see that before either, so we'll have to get glue down in that a little bit later. And actually, there seems to be a separate little tiny crack right there next to it in addition. So we'll fix those. It was good that I did that because it made me look at the crack a little bit better. I'll set this aside for 4 or 5 hours at least, if not longer. It's been several days that the violin has been sitting since we glued the neck on. Everything looks real good down the neck and everything. New fingerboard fits it really well. I think everything's fine. Needs a lot of TLC around here, you know, to clean it up, and especially here in the back. I'm going to start with my smallest little chisel here, and I'm going to just try to, you know, just clean up this pocket here where the purfling needs to go in. The little piece that came out of there was really of no value. It just was in bad shape already, wasn't long enough, etc. So we're just going to have to replace it with a whole new piece. So I'm just taking my time trying to clean it up so I can see what I'm dealing with. In fact, the purfling over the whole instrument is really hard to see. It's been stained so dark. I'm going to go see if I can find some wood purfling that I can start checking across here to see if we're going to be able to fill this in or just what we're going to do. I'm not even sure. I know he wants it to look good, so we're going to do our best. I'm going to try to give you a close look. I've set this heel here. You know, there's an odd shaped hole there left. It's not a smooth, straight hole. So there's going to have to be some fill put back in there somehow. I've got 2 pieces of purfling. One's a little wider, thicker than the other one. This one's 10 thousandths thicker than this one. I'm not sure which one goes in there. And honestly, I can't even really tell whether it's black, white, black, or white, black, white. I mean, it's that hard to tell. It's so dark the way it's been colored. Because I do have a white, black, white also, but I don't think that's what this is. Yeah, on the front here I can kind of see it a little better. It's black, white, black. It looks like it's the thicker stuff. I think the thicker stuff will work better and will fill the hole better, so I think that's what we're going to be dealing with. The trick at this point is trying to get a good end and get these 2 purflings matched up perfectly. Perfectly matched purfling. That's what we're looking for here. It's so scarred up. It's really hard to tell much about it. Guess I'm going to get the microscope out where I can do a better detailed job. I mean, I've got my close-up glasses on, but they're just not good enough for this kind of detail. Okay, I know it's still impossible for you to see what I'm doing exactly, but I'm glad I got the microscope out because I've already seen things I didn't realize. This purfling is actually busted out quite a ways back through here. You really can't even see it because of all the glue and the junk that's in there. With your naked eye or even with those magnifying glasses, you just can't see it. When you get it under the microscope, you can clearly see there's a whole big mess here. It goes back to this far, so from there to here, it's messed up. So we really need a piece of purfling that fits from here at least to here and maybe a little further. So a longer piece than I thought. It's going to be quite a process. I'm going to be spending a little time cleaning all this out and straightening it up with this little X-Acto knife. I doubt I'm going to film all of that either. I'll film anything that looks interesting that I can show you. This is really a mess. It's just filled in with glue here. It's a pretty big hole. So we got to get all that cleaned out and straightened out first, and then we'll see what the next step is. This area is so scarred up in here, I honestly could not tell, even under the microscope, I could not tell where the purfling was and where the wood was and where the finish was, etc. and so forth. It just all blended together and you couldn't tell it. What I started doing was, in this damaged area here, I scraped a little tiny bit of the finish off back on the body side and out on the rim side. Scraped some of the finish away just so I could see what's going on there, and it's still hard to even quite comprehend it. It really isn't an ebony white ebony. It's more like a, I don't know exactly, it's slightly darker brown to white to slightly darker brown again. It's really hard to tell what this is. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I'm still not convinced what I'm dealing with here yet. I think I'm going to actually have to scrape a little bit of it off on this side to see what it looks like on this side. I don't think it's painted on. I really don't. It's not very well defined purfling. It's kind of different. Pretty much different than anything I've ever run into. At this point in time, it looks like I'm going to probably have to make something to get it to match, because it doesn't look like it's going to match this way. I'm glad I got the microscope out in one way, and then in the other way, it really is making it difficult to decide what to do. Really kind of at a loss on how to make this look real good. Just, having all kinds of issues here, so I thought I'd go ahead and try to fill this crack through here first. I just think that will be the easiest in the long run. Nothing's easy though, that's for darn sure. Sanded this little piece of wood down to, I don't even know what it is, it's pretty dang thin. 19 thousandths. And believe it or not, that's actually a hair too thick. I need it down to about 14 thousandths or something. So I'm sanding the one edge here to try to knock it down a little bit, to thin it down where it'll slide down in that crack. Just thinning the very edge.
I could hear him say, son, you should move away. He said, farm life is dying.
And I probably should just leave it alone and let that dry. So I'll give it some time before I cut this off and smooth this out. With my little thickness sander, I fed a piece of maple through there till I got it down to about 25 thousandths roughly. Yeah, exactly 25 thousandths. I fed this down till I got it 20 thousandths. So I got two 20 thousandths pieces of walnut and a 25 thousandths pieces of a piece of maple. And I can sandwich them together there to make a piece of purfling that will much closer match this purfling that's in here. In fact, it matches it pretty well, so that may be what they used. Anyway, I'm going to glue that together, clamp it, let that set while this is setting up. This is probably dry enough now already. It's only been about 15 minutes. It doesn't take long on little thin light things like this for them to glue up. Less glue is more on this. I'm going to try to get this as thin as possible. I'm just going to put glue on one side of each piece, sandwich them together, wipe off the excess glue that I can get off, and then I'll probably just put this in a little vise fact, I'll just probably use my little shop fox vise. I say little, it's kind of big and heavy, but it's perfect for these kinds of little jobs. Kind of poke it down in there, I think, just like that, and tighten her down. That should do it right there. It's in the ugly duckling stage, as I've mentioned many times before. I'm hoping we're going to turn it into a beautiful swan here in just a few more minutes. I'm going to very lightly score along this with this blade. And when I say lightly, it's because this wood is only about 12 thousandths of an inch thick. So pressing at all and you're right through it. So I'm just trying to just take the very tip end of the scalpel blade and just rake it along there, more or less just to make a tiny line to give it its place to break off. That's one side scored twice. It'll probably break off when I score this side, I would imagine. Looks pretty good under the microscope. Just a teeny bit of a lip right there.
Son, please don't stay.
I'm blending it across where that little place cracked here too, so that eventually we can buff this all out, sand it, you know, dye it, etc., and make it look good. Just going to put a touch of dye on that little strip to see if it kind of starts going away. I'll even do that under the microscope so I can just barely touch it. That's about as light a touch as I've got right there. You know, again, we're still trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Here's really what we're doing. Okay, that's fairly cleaned up. It doesn't look like these ends are perfectly straight though. This one looks like it's back a little further than this one. I don't know if you can tell what I'm pointing at in the camera, but in other words, I guess you'd say the base side is a little more recessed than the treble side here. I was wondering if that's the purfling sticking out there. It truly is difficult to tell. I'm going to wait and see how my purfling matches up in there before I make a decision on cutting that back. See, my purfling has been drying about 15 minutes here in that press. It's squeezed pretty tightly. Didn't have a lot of glue there to start with, so it doesn't take long for it to dry through that dry wood. I do think that's in the way, this little piece that's sticking out here. I don't know. I hate to trim it in one way and another way. I think I have to. Alright, so now I'm going to have to get this good and flat on this one edge. Then I'm going to cut a little thin strip off of that. So I'll do that at my little bandsaw. I'm not going to show it, but basically I'm just going to rip a little thin strip off of there. Well, off camera I cut a strip of this stuff and I thought it would probably work, and it probably still would work, but I got to thinking it might be just a little bit short in the height area. The offcut piece is actually bigger, so I'm going to use the offcut piece. I cut it long so that I could sneak up on it here and force it in there, because I want it to fit incredibly tight. The tighter it fits, the less you'll see the seam. I'm marking it with the scalpel to try to get the finest little mark I can. You got to kind of cut little tiny pieces off, or otherwise it'll break. So I'm cutting little tiny pieces, moving up to that mark. I'm also beveling it slightly so that as I push it down in there, it gets tighter. That's a real key trick to doing this kind of work. Anytime you're fitting a piece in, if you can bevel it, you're way better off to bevel it so that as you slide it in, it gets tighter and tighter. That's probably the key tip I can give you for binding repair or purfling repair, as in this case here. I think I'm going to shave just a hair more off of this longer edge here.
I returned for a visit, but I was too late.
I don't know how well that shows up, but you can see the piece is sitting there. It's slightly beveled, and as I force it in there, it's going to get tighter and tighter, but I think it's just a little bit too much right now. It still needs a hair off of it.
My father lay dying, I knew it was fate.
I think you can see how it's going to start going across there and matching up. Now, I don't have it forced in tight yet or anything, but I think it's going to work. I think we're in good shape. Better shape than I thought we were going to be in, actually. So, let's get the glue in here.
But he turned and said, son, you should move away. I just couldn't leave it.
My little leather tool here comes in handy all the time. I think this is actually a stitching tool for working with stitching and things in leather work. It's been so many years ago that I used to do all that. It's just the perfect tool a lot of times for pushing things and getting them where they need to be. It's got kind of a rounded little foot on it. It's just perfect for this kind of stuff. And the fact that it fits in there that tight, once we can trim it down, I don't think you'll even see the joint, hardly. And then this, I think we're going to be able to trim up and make it fit in there really well. In fact, I'm going to start working on that right now so that I can go ahead and get that glued and clamped as well. That's better than great right there. Once that's all cleaned up, sanded smooth, dyed correctly, man, it's going to be hard to tell. I think the customer should be happy with this. I hope he is. I think I could go a hair more. A lot of times when you're fitting something into a spot that's half round file and using the round side, even though you're doing a fairly straight thing, a lot of times it's the best way to go because you can get very specific with where the file is hitting. Well, you're supposed to know when to quit, and I think I know when to quit, and that's right now.
And he knew I would stay. Now I'm an old dirt farmer.
It's still a little bit of an ugly duckling right at the moment, but it's progressing to a beautiful swan, I can tell. Using my little Menard clamps here with the rubber on them, I think will work fine on this.
I scrape a living from the soul.
All right, I'm gonna let it sit now and go work on some other projects. That's what it looks like to you. We'll just have to wait and see how it goes. Well, another day has dawned here at the shop, and I just took the clamps off that. You can see that it looks pretty good. This heel now is quite proud of the heel of the neck. You know, this is still kind of an ugly duckling right in here too, so this is all speculation on my part that I think I can make this look good. It's hard to say. I've got a real sharp little chisel here. I'm just going to try to clean this up. I could get my finger plane in there a little bit, but I'm afraid I'll hit some other things, so I'm just going to use this.
Like my father before me, I labor and toil.
Well, to me, it looks a lot better. it's still not great, and I'm not sure I can make it great. That's the bottom line problem here. And I'm pretty sure the customer wants it great. So, I don't know, we may have a problem. These curved blades are often the best tool for scraping in places like this is a dished place, and this will fit that dish, and I can get in here and scrape things clean. But these blades, for me, are becoming increasingly harder to find. I just ordered a large quantity of them off of eBay, but in the local box stores and things, they just don't carry this style blade anymore. They used to, but pretty much everybody's just got the real sharp, pointy blade now. But you can see that you can get in there with that curved blade and scrape in a place like this where you really can't get much anything else in there. And my goal is to try to scrape this all level. It's going to look ugly again, and then we'll just have to stain it back. Whether or not we can stain it back to look good, that's the question. And honestly, I don't know. I may have to get Caleb to do the staining, because you know me, I'm colorblind, so it's tough. The color matching is the hardest thing I do. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to, feather this out a little bit. So to make it look good, you're just going to have to cut back here. It's starting to be smoother, but it's looking worse. Again, you go through a lot of phases with this kind of stuff, so you can't get too disappointed in any particular phase, because the next phase hopefully will pick it up and make it look better again. I'm trying to go over this little cracked area that cracked over out here on the outer edge and level that off where you don't see that crack, and blend it in too. And of course, my new little piece I put in there, the white is much whiter than the white that was in the original. I was hoping they would blend better, but they don't. So staining again will be my only choice here to try to clean that up. And again, it's a feathering effect that I'm doing here. You don't want an abrupt change, and that's what I'm trying to do, is feather it out. It's not looking great, to be perfectly honest with you. This one spot here is really deep, unfortunately. If that wasn't so deep, this wouldn't look too bad. The staining might bring it back. This is not matching up with the neck real well anymore. We've got to get it to match up, so it's a little large. See what I can do with a file here at first. And the chisel, works, but boy, you got to go the right way or you'll chip out a big chunk of wood.
Watching the leaves fall to the ground.
Pretty good for the chisel part of it. You can see how uneven it is now, so I'll have to do the other side.
Just like my life, they're spinning around. The touch of
That's
the wind,
pretty good from where we were.
clouds rolling on, reminds me of when life was a song.
Now that those spots have filled in, I'm going to put just a tiny drop of CA glue on those spots, because the sawdust is in those holes now, and this may stabilize that. I just took the tip of the cloth there and dabbed at it there to dry it up a little bit and to keep it from running. That helps it dry a lot faster. It's just about dry now. I should have had the camera on. I just didn't think about it at the moment. I was doing a little touch-up cleanup on this, and then I just reached in this dark brown leather dye, tried it on here. To my eye, I'd say is about as close as you can get just to matching this. Pretty darn close. The cool thing about these dyes, these leather dyes like this, is you can take alcohol and lighten them up and different things. So if it's not the right color, we can work on it some more. But boy, I tell you what, that's a pretty close match if you ask me. It's just a good brown that kind of matches a lot of things.
Oh, when life was a song, we'd dance and we'd sing. When life was a song.
Probably doesn't look that great on camera, but once the finish gets on there, because see, it's so dull, the leather dye is a alcohol-based dye, and it dries, and it just makes everything look real dull. But once you get finish on that, that might actually blend in pretty well.
But it's smelled down since you're gone.
Trying to touch up all these light spots on this too to darken them up. There's so many really light spots on it, which in some ways looks good. I don't mind it too much, but I'm trying to get it all more uniform. I'm not trying to completely get rid of it. So in other words, you'll still see these worn spots. It's through this dye.
The sun in the sky has disappeared. It's covered up by a cloud full of tears.
After it dries a little bit, you wipe off those light spots and then they come light again. They're just not quite as light as they were. So it kind of makes it look more natural that way. Well, I'm just going to go around and keep touching up and doing little fixes and things on this. Not going to show it all, but basically just lightly touching up all the areas. It looks pretty good to me, but anyway, we'll see. Gonna have to fire Caleb. He didn't tell me we were almost out of the True Oil varnish here. I realized we were out of it this past Friday. Of course, he's been gone since Thursday, and it's Tuesday today, so bottom line is I'm gonna have to fire him. And I would fire him if he wasn't already quitting, but you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. I'm gonna put a little oil right on that seam, this True Oil varnish. I'm going to blend it out over the other finish a little bit to help me when I sand it back and everything, that maybe it'll blend it a little bit better. Often when you put the finish on, the color changes so dramatically. It often just goes way darker or way lighter, and that's especially true when you're using an oil type varnish. It's going to take about at least 3 applications of this to do a good job. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. And once that's all blended, I think it will blend too. Once I buff it all out, hand buff it, and I'll blend the whole area, that's actually going to look pretty good. So I'm back to thinking it's going to look real good again. I was kind of worried there for a while. We'll let that all set and dry, and probably will have to be late afternoon or tomorrow before we do any more to it. It's the next day. I, off camera, put on several more coats of this through the day. So it's been coated fairly well. You know, it doesn't blend in very well right now, but I think it will once we buff it all out and everything. I put just a drop in the cap here. It doesn't take much of this at all. Once again, I'm trying to fill the little cracked void there. Just coat the whole area a few times because it's soaking in.
Whispering creek that's rolling along reminds me of when life was a song.
And that looks pretty good for that coat, so we'll have to let it set again. With the humid day today, raining outside, this might take a while to dry too. It may only get 1 coat on it today. The fiddle is set drying overnight. This oil varnish that I applied is now dry to the touch. I'm going to lightly sand it. I've got some 320 here. This is wet or dry paper. You know, I may go to my other sandpaper because this wet or dry seems to always ball up with finish, but I thought I'd try it first. My goal is to try to level this all out so that it doesn't look repaired in this area. That's going to be difficult to do, so I'll have to sand a whole lot of this off and apply more, there's no doubt.
Oh, when life was a song, we'd dance and we'd sing.
True oil varnish, the instructions say to use steel wool, and I don't have anything against steel wool. I think it works really well. In fact, it levels out quicker probably with steel wool than it does anything else. It doesn't make the surface smooth though. It looks smooth, but it's not smooth. That's the difference with the steel wool. I want to get it smooth first. To me, the best way to do that is with the sandpaper. But if you have little voids like right here, the steel wool will reach down in that void and scratch it and make it look good, but it's really not level. Now there's a little thick spot of varnish there, and that didn't dry real well, so that's balling up and rolling up, wouldn't you know?
Life was a song, but it's moved on.
What I was wanting to do was sand this down level, and then where this little low spot is in the seam is to fill that in some more and hopefully get it to level out where you can't really tell we did anything here. I've sanded off most of the finish I've put on there actually. Finishing is always the hardest. There's nothing really harder than the finishing. I know people think that the repairs we do is the hardest, but when it gets right down to the details is always the hardest.
Since you're gone, a song that's been sung so many times, I've been truly tired, weathers and dives. Oh, when life was a song, we dance and we sing.
I think it's going to be all right in the end. It just takes a lot of work to get it to the end. You know, again, the repair work was tedious and stuff, but that's, you know, fairly straightforward. This finish stuff is never straightforward. It doesn't matter how many times you've done it, how many different instruments, it will always find a way to throw you a curve.
When life was a song, when life was a song, we dance and we sing. When life was a song, but it's moved on since you're gone.
Well, that's color-wise looking pretty good again. I guess I'll wipe it down with some more finish and see what it looks like after the next wipe down with some more finish. Well, I've got some newspaper down here so that I don't get this steel wool all over the place. This is dry. It's the next day, of course, in this case, and you know, I don't want to take off much finish. The steel wool doesn't seem to take off very much, and yet it kind of smooths it out too. So I think it's the most delicate way to do this, and I'm hoping it will help me blend it into the other finish as well. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's blending into the other finish at all. It's erasing off the top of the finish, but it's not blending into it. I'm still going to try to blend it with some polishes and waxes and things, but the finish itself is not blending. All right, well, that's probably all the steel wool I'm going to do to it. I'll clean up my mess here and we'll see what happens with the next step. I've got a little semichrome polish here, a little damp paper towel. Just putting a little bit on there. I'm going to start on the fiddle part before, not into my finish so much, and see if I can somehow blend it together. Actually, it doesn't look too terribly bad. It's the best it's looked so far. You can barely tell where it's at. That's promising. Okay, maybe once in a while the finish does what you want it to. Once in a while. But I wouldn't hold my breath on it. That's not looking too bad. You can sort of tell it and sort of see it, but it's not too bad. Kind of better than I was thinking it was going to turn out there after the initial rub down with the steel wool. Honestly, it's not getting any better. If anything, it's getting worse. Let's just try a little of the Be Good oil and see if it does anything to it. That's looking pretty good. You can see it, I ain't gonna lie to you, but you know, it's pretty well hidden. Not too bad. Well, for once, things kind of worked out pretty well. It ain't perfect, but you can't make them perfect. But it's pretty close to it. It's about as close to perfect as I think I can get. Yeah, I cleaned it up all over with the Be Good oil and I did the neck too. See, we took the finish off the neck. Typically, violin necks don't have finish on them, and so this really is much better, much slicker. Oh my gosh, with that Be Good oil on there, it is the slickest neck. And I cleaned up the scroll area. I really like the scroll on this violin. Another fellow made the comment that the little scroll is a cheap violin, and I said, nah, I don't agree with that. The detail in the scroll is what tells you whether it's a good scroll or not, and this is a very detailed scroll. It's carved very well. Anyway, it looks nice. I'm pretty happy with it. I think our next job is to set it up, and let's see what it sounds like. I was getting ready to put the final touches on this violin, set it up, and I'm looking at this tailpiece. I'm not crazy about the tailpiece. These tuners don't match. There's a hole in it here. It's got the gut strap around the back. And that's okay. It's just that it's not adjustable at all, and I don't think it's adjusted correctly, and then trying to readjust it's kind of tough, and it's old and dried out, so it probably would break anyway. This is a composite tailpiece. It's got the 4 adjusters. Now, I know the concert violinists out of the world out there are not crazy about the 4 adjusters. They prefer just the 1. But I like this. I think it's made in West Germany. It's a quality piece. It's got an adjustable tail strap here so that we can set it up just really fine with this. And I'm going to put this on there. I'll put this back in the case, and if he decides he wants to use it, that's fine. But I would prefer to set it up with this. I think it'll be nicer. I've got a new bridge to cut for it also. The bridge is full size right now. It's thick and heavy and clunky. It'll cut down to the proper size. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to set it up with these Pro Art, Diodario Pro Art strings. These are the nylon core, and this one has the aluminum wound E. You can buy this set in either configuration, and I always buy it with the E has the aluminum winding around it. It gives it a much more mellow, just a creamier sound. These are very good sounding strings in my opinion, especially for the money, and even these are pricey. I mean, I think we're in the $40 range retail. So I'm going to set it up with these, and we'll see how it goes. I'm not going to show the whole setup. I'll just show highlights and points of things that I think you'll be interested in. All right, so I have a real high quality bridge, and I'm going to set it approximately where it goes, and I'm going to trace the top here on the feet. The feet always come pretty heavy, and so you need to trim them back. And maybe you can see the little lines I put across there. By the way, the writing always goes to the back. You have to take this off in very small slices, otherwise you just break it. If you try to cut it all at once, you'll bust the foot for sure. And even taking it off in small slices, you can break it. I've done it. You can probably see how I've got that down almost to my little line there. I'm looking at the ends of the feet to see how thick they are. I want to leave a little bit there, but I don't want them very thick. You have to look at it very close and inspect it very close. You know, assuming I cut those square, it should already set up there, and it does. Sets up there pretty well. And looking at the ends of the feet, they look pretty good. You know, I would say I'd score that at least an 8 right now. Here's some 220 sandpaper. Now, here's where I do it different than everyone else. Most people slide it back and forth this way. My problem with that is that it rocks the feet, and then the front edge and the back edge are round. I don't want that. I want full contact with the feet. By doing it sideways like I do it, and I only move it a very, very short distance, then the feet stay nice and square, nothing rocks. This also gives me real good control on the vertical by going sideways. In other words, I know that I've got the angle right. Like I always want just the tiniest amount, and I'm exaggerating, the tiniest amount of back slope. I don't want it sloped forward because the strings are always pulling forward. By doing it the way I do it, it gives me full control over that. I've been scolded by so many violin people because they say I'm not doing it right. But you know what? My results are, in my opinion, as good as it gets. I don't think you can do it any better. You do it your way, I'll do it mine. And that will make that fit absolutely perfect. You can't see a space under it anywhere. It really sits nice. Now that we've got that kind of sitting where we want it and slightly leaning back just a tiny bit, then what I do is I take a sharp, regular number 2 pencil. On the treble side, I kind of make a long arc, kind of following the arc of the fingerboard. Kind of like that. On the bass side, I do a little shorter arc. That gives you that offset curve that everyone likes. It gives a little flatter side on this side and a little sharper side on the bass side. I'll go over to the sander probably and just sand that off because it's not that much in this case. We will have a fairly tall bridge on this, which is good in my opinion. That puts a little more down pressure on it. I'll show you what that looks like when I get that straightened out. It only took about 10 seconds to sand off there. You can see that the shape of that now is kind of a longer arch on this side and a little shorter arch on this side. And that's still adjustable. You know, it's not cast in stone yet. We'll kind of adjust that as we go along if we need to. So now the bridge, for all intents and purposes, is about the right size, or it's pretty close, but it's way thick. It's really thick, heavy, and if you use it like this, you would be doing yourself a disservice. It's not the way to do it. With my little finger plane, and as sharp as it is, I think it'll cut this pretty well. At least I believe it will. And again, you always have to cut the grain the way it wants to be cut. I started that way and I could tell instantly it was grabbing and wanting to be cut in the opposite direction. So I'm cutting this way, it cuts real smooth this way. If you pay attention to that as you learn to carve wood, that will be your best thing you can learn as to which way the grain wants to be carved. The only problem with that is that you'll get into certain places where you have to go across the grain a different way for one reason or another. This is one of those reasons right now. This little piece that's hanging down in the middle there, if I go straight across that way, it's going to break off, guarantee you. If I go this way, it can still break off because it's pushing away from it. But if you go into it this way and pushing it back into itself, it typically won't break off that way. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut into it this way, cut that down. You just have to do what you have to do sometimes. I'm kind of working all of the wood that way, and then I can go back to my other way of carving. And then again, you got these little pieces here that can break off real easy if you go across them wrong. So you got to be careful about them too. You want to carve them into themselves as well. Otherwise, you'll break them off. Ask me how I know that. Now over here, it's a little more difficult because this does not want to be carved this way, but you just kind of have to make it happen. Quite a heavy bridge. They most all come heavy when you get them from the, well, if you get them unfitted. You can buy them fitted, by the way. The only problem with that is there is no such thing as fitted until you fit it. So you might as well just buy them unfitted and do all the work yourself and make it exactly for your fiddle. That's looking pretty good, pretty uniform. You need to inspect it close all the time. You know, you try to take it off evenly so that this one side stays in one plane. You got to know when to stop too, because you don't want it too thin. You get it too thin, then you know you don't have a strong enough bridge. I think you would be surprised how much you can take off of these and still have a strong bridge. Now, what I do then after I carve it like that is I take it and lay it on a flat board like this, and then with some like 220 and run it across there to get it just to flatten out the little bumps and things. To be honest, there's not much there. It flattens pretty quickly if you carve well with your carving tool. You can pretty much see already it's pretty flat. There's pretty much a trick to just about everything you do on a fiddle. And I've got the little tail piece here and the tail strap that goes around the end pin, which I'm missing the end pin, by the way. This is the end pin that came with it. Let's see if it's tight enough. So it's pretty good. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. I thought in the commotion there I lost the screw to the end of this, and I did temporarily. Fortunately, I found it. But these thread right on. There are threads on there. Maybe you can see that. This is a nylon strap, and it really is very strong. You know, I just take one side off, feed it through from the inside, then poke it back through this way, and then thread the nut back on. I try to adjust them about equal like that and see where I'm at. That's just about right. Now what I do is I poke the end up through here a little bit so I can get a hold of this. I pull it up and then I cut this off. I leave about a 1/16 of an inch sticking out, something like that. I'll poke the other one through and lift it up and cut it off. Again, about a 1/16 of an inch left. That gives you plenty of adjustment if you need to adjust it one way or the other. In fact, if anything, this one's probably a hair long, so if anything, I'd be tightening it up. I don't think there's any problem. So now, with this much in place, we can start putting strings on. And I like to work from the closest peg to the tailpiece. I like to start with the G and work my way to the furthest peg. It's a little tricky setting up a violin. I always like to say a violin is set up perfectly when it's ready to fall apart. And that's pretty much the truth. Everything is delicate, everything is friction, nothing is glued together basically. So like even this strap here on the back end, it doesn't want to stay there while I'm putting this first string on. The way I do it is I poke it through the hole and I wind it the wrong way, a wrap or so, wrap and a half, and then I cross back over the string and then I start winding toward the peg head to the head of the peg. That way it locks it in place. I like to keep everything really neat, so when I get done with this peg box up here, these strings are not going every direction. They all look uniform and straight. Okay, so that kind of holds that in place now, just temporarily. And I can even put this bridge on there if I wanted to, although it might be a little premature for that. Next string is the E string, which is the next one in line here. And again, this is the aluminum wrapped E string, so it's a nylon core with aluminum wrapping. I'm going to try to get you close here so you can see how I wrap this. I think this is very important myself, and it's a little different on a violin than other instruments. But I poke it down through the hole and let about, an 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch stick past there. And if you notice, I'm wrapping on this side of the string that's sticking through the hole. And I wrap it a full turn like that, and then about where it's coming through the hole, then I cross back over and I get on the other side of the strings, and that locks it in, and now it's pulling toward the box. It's wrapping going that way, and I think that's important. So now you can see I've got the E string and the G string on here, and neither one of them are very tight. In fact, it's not tight enough to really put any pressure on the top yet, but it's just tight enough to hold the bridge in place. I'm going to go ahead and put in the other 2 strings, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm ready to put in the sound post and locate the sound post. You know, there's no black and white standard on a violin because so many of them are slightly different. Typically, I set this at about 325 millimeters, I believe it is. I believe that's my number. This one's going to be a little odd because it's a little bigger than that. The standard is you go right across these little notches here. You also kind of want to make sure that you're not real close to the end of the fingerboard or real close to the tailpiece. So, you know, you've got a little things to consider there. I like to set them at the 325 because that's fairly standard, and then, you know, you go from one fiddle to the next and your scale doesn't change. But it's just really what you get used to. So this one's going to be a little longer than that. It's around 332, something like that. And I think we're in decent shape in terms of the way it's set up there. So now we can turn our attention to the sound post. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I have no idea if this sound post is the right size or not. It's what came with the fiddle, so let's see what it does when we try to put it in there. I've got this fancy sound post tool, but I don't get along with it all that great. I've got my little coat hanger here with a little tiny hook right on the very end, and I mean it's very, very tiny hook. I don't know if it'll focus on that. The grain is running across this piece this way, and I go directly into that grain like that and screw this in. I screw it in about, 2/3 of the way from the bottom or 1/3 away from the top, whichever way you want to think of it. And by having that little hook on there, it kind of holds it in place. I can go through the sound hole here, and assuming this is the right length, and that's a big assumption, it's fairly easy to set them in place. You hold the bottom down against the back, the bottom of the sound post, and then you manipulate the top to get it right where you want it. If you get it right where you want it, you just pull it out, and it kind of pulls itself in there. It kind of wedges in, and then the little hook on the other end lets you adjust it to the fine details of it. And of course, you got to be a delicate touch on that. That went really easy. Maybe you can see the sound post in there if we can get the light and everything to cooperate. I'm going to rock it a little bit. But basically, the sound post is, set about an 1/8 inch behind the treble foot, roughly. And everybody's a little different on that and where they prefer them. A little further back gives you a little bit more mellow tone. If you get it directly under the foot, it's pretty harsh. You don't want it there. Okay, so now the next thing is to figure out where we want the strings on here. I like to spread my strings out. I look at the distance here of how far apart they are. What I do sometimes is mark 2 of the strings, and then I check the other 2 to see if they're the same distance. And in this case, they're all about equally spaced. So with that in mind, then I just take a real sharp pencil and I mark on both sides of the string. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this out, and with a tri-cornered file, I'm just going to put a little hint of a dent. I'm not really filing much. It's just a tiny little dent just so the string doesn't move. And there's just the faintest hint of a dent there. You really would have to look hard to see it. but the string can find its way into those little spots and stay there. The E strings often have a little piece of plastic on the string, and you can mount that right on top of the bridge here, and the trick of that is you don't want the plastic extending forward of the bridge. I try to make it end right at the front edge of the bridge. All right, so we're going to start tightening up the strings slowly here. Now, as you tighten fiddle strings, the bridge is going to want to pull forward and walk forward, and they always do. And that's pretty much true on all instruments that have a floating bridge. Even mandolins, everything always pulls the bridge forward. Banjos, everything. That's why I like to leave them sloped just a tiny bit backwards. Then by the time you get them right where you want them, then it's pretty much straight up and down. It's going to have a nice sound, I think. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tune it up off camera and get it all tuned up, and then we'll show you what it sounds like. We've got the fiddle up in just tip-top shape. It's really a nice fiddle. It's nice in a lot of ways. It's nice looking, it's nicely made, it's got a really nice sound, and keep in mind, I've said this many times before, I'm not a fiddle player. I just can barely play a few notes just so I can hear what they sound like. So don't expect anything, and you'll hear the same thing you've heard on all the other fiddles. You know, it's got a real nice, deep, mellow tone. If you had a real concert violinist here to play it, it would put on quite a show. One thing I can tell, even if I can't play it, is quality, and it's got quality written all over it. It's a very nice violin. So I hope I did it justice. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching. If it's your first time here, click that subscribe button. And if it's not your first time here and you haven't clicked the subscribe button, shame on you, and get after it. Please be sure to click the thumbs up also. Thank you very much.